Good afternoon. It's News Radio 1029 KARN. I am your host, Brad Schmidt. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. 501 403 KARN, 501 403 5276 if you would like to be a part of the discussion today. And of course, a lot to talk about today. The big news yesterday, of course, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump over the weekend, and then, of course, yesterday the kicking off of the Republican National Convention. Donald Trump announcing his chosen running mate as J.D. Vance of Ohio, and so there's still a lot to talk about. All of those topics, of course, the RNC still going on today, and the news and the news cycle will be focused on that for the next several days. The other interesting thing, of course, we got to be careful not to forget, up until Saturday with the gigantically historic events of Saturday with the attempt on Donald Trump's life at the rally in Pennsylvania. Before that, the news cycle was focused 100% for the last couple of weeks on whether or not Joe Biden should continue as the nominee for the Democrat Party. And if you'll notice, nobody's talking about that anymore. Nobody cares too much about whether or not Joe Biden is the nominee for the presidency. So we'll talk a little bit about that and why that matters and why that's part of the discussion, because I think on some levels the Democrats are simply acknowledging the reality that there is a very, very low chance that Donald Trump will not be elected come November, that there is a very, very insignificant possibility that Joe Biden continues as the president. Now, why that's important and why we need to talk about it is, as I have been saying all along for the last several months, as Dan Bongino talked about with Lee Zeller out of New York today in an interview, and so many other pundits have been talking about, that doesn't mean we can get complacent. That doesn't mean that if you want Donald Trump to win the next presidency, to win the presidency this next election, that you can just assume, well, now they've tried to kill him. They've, this attempt on his life, it's created this jump in popularity for him. He's got this in the bag. I don't have to work as hard. I don't have to worry so much. I don't have to, get out and vote. I don't have to be involved in grassroots efforts and things like that. So I can just kind of coast as Donald Trump can coast into the White House in November. If we do that, we will lose. The Trump campaign and anyone involved with him, if they get that mentality, they will lose. And Lee Zeldin is it Zeldin? Lee Zeller? Zeldin? I think it's Lee Zeldin. I always mess up his name because I used to have a pastor when I was in college with the last name Pastor Zell. And so I always get confused. But anyway, it's Lee Zeldin. He's a former gubernatorial candidate out of New York. In the interview, he talked about this complacency, this tendency to just get, well, we got this in the bag. We'll be fine. We don't have to worry about it. But it also then causes problems with down ballot races as well. We got to make sure that we're voting for down ballot races, some very, very important races all across the country, and even right here in Little Rock. Now, part of this is, I'll be honest, I'm biased. He's a personal friend of mine, but District 75 right here in West Little Rock. My friend Michael White is running as a libertarian because the Republican Party chose not to even bother running a candidate against a Democrat in District 75. It was the district that Heather Turchie lost last time around, and so Michael White, as a libertarian, is running a very solid, conservative-focused, liberty-focused campaign in District 75 to unseat a Democrat that the Republicans thought was unbeatable. So they didn't even bother running a candidate. So that race alone, right here in our very own, West Little Rock, that race alone is an incredibly significant and important race for the legislature for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons being, and we saw this, if you're wondering where I get this information, there was a similar situation in Wyoming a few years back where a libertarian candidate ended up winning a seat in the Wyoming state legislature. And many times Republicans would go to him and say, hey, we want to try to pass this legislation, but if we don't, or if we try to introduce it, the few Democrats in the Wyoming state legislature will immediately oppose it just because we're Republicans, just because they're so ideologically opposed to anything we would ever even consider that they don't even think about whether or not it would be actually good for the people of Wyoming. And so they would go to him and say, hey, why don't you introduce this? We'll get behind it. The Democrats won't be automatically opposed to it because it didn't come from a Republican. And they were able to move a lot of legislation forward that proved very positive and turned out being a boon and a benefit to the cause of liberty in their state. And so we have that very real possibility right here in Little Rock, in West Little Rock. You get someone like Michael White in Congress who can avoid some of that nonsensical partisan bickering and actually move the cause of liberty forward in the state of Arkansas. We have some very, very significant races. So it's not just about going, well, Donald Trump's got this in the bag. We don't have to worry about it. Yeah, he is very likely going to win in Arkansas. There's very little chance that Donald Trump is going to lose in Arkansas. Just like there's very little chance that Donald Trump is going to win in California. But that doesn't mean that there are not very important races all up and down the ballot in the state of Arkansas. It doesn't mean that there's not important races all up and down the ballot in California. There are some strong conservatives running in some of the Central Valley area and in Northern California. But they get so overshadowed by Los Angeles and San Diego and San Francisco that they end up getting kind of forgotten about. So we got to make sure that no matter what is going on, no matter how much the media tells us there's going to be a red wave, no matter what the polling data shows us, we've got to make sure that we're out there and getting involved. And whether it's helping a candidate knock on doors or donating to your particular favored candidate, there must be an involvement of we the people. One of the things that Lee Zeldin talked about with Bongino today was the issue of these mail-in ballots and ballot harvesting and all that kind of stuff. He said, look, if we reject those things and don't engage with them and don't leverage them for our benefit, we're going to lose. He said with all of this, mail-in balloting, early voting, and ballot harvesting and all that kind of stuff, if we don't engage with that, if we don't use those tools to our benefit, to the best of our abilities and within the law, we are going to lose on many of these races and possibly even in the presidential race. In Pennsylvania, this assassination attempt against Trump took place in Pennsylvania, a state that was generally believed to be guaranteed for Joe Biden. Not so much anymore. But what they do have in Pennsylvania is all of this ballot harvesting, mail-in balloting, early voting nonsense. And I don't know what all of their laws and what specific things they have there in Pennsylvania. But if we as citizens, not us personally because we live in Arkansas, but just the general, we the people, don't engage with those tools and don't figure out how to use and leverage mail-in balloting, early voting, and ballot harvesting and all that stuff to our benefit, then we will lose that race before the ballot, before we even get to November 5th. Before we ever make it to November, it will already be lost. So these are the things and I'm not saying I'm all for or I think that ballot harvesting is good or that mail-in balloting is wonderful. I despise all of that stuff because I think it is ripe for corruption. I think it lends itself specifically to ease of skewing the results, and I think they're all crooked, and I think we should do away with most of it. However, it is and has been legalized in several states. And if we don't engage with those processes, if we don't understand how they work and research and study how to best leverage them for our benefit as opposed to the left doing it for their benefit, we will lose. We will lose these elections, and we just cannot afford to have that happen. That's just all there is to it. So that's just one of the things we'll get to. I want to talk a little bit about the Trump document case being tossed out. Bob Menendez, the senator out of New York, being convicted of bribery and corruption. Elon Musk supporting Donald Trump. I want to talk a little bit about that. And we're also going to do a little bit of a history lesson on Hitler and Nazism and what this all really means and why that accusation is such a dangerous accusation. So we'll get to all of that as we continue with the Schmidt Show next on News Radio 102.9 KARN.